So hello, welcome to Tucson Festival of Books 2023. I'm Carl from the Pima County Public Library, and with me today are students from Amphitheater High School who are going to interview Brittney Morris, author of The Jump. Take it away.
Firstly, I want to give thanks to the Pima County Public Library as well as Carl Murdoch for setting this thing up. I want to give thanks to Ms. Burleson for giving us this opportunity. My name is Emma, and this is my first question. I love how diverse the characters are, the attitudes, their personality, and their history, and I understand their trauma and backstory, so I'm a little hitting closer to home than others. Like Han, his trauma with his mother and worrying about his father, I understand that from a personal level. And I want to know if there are any backstories or small details that you've put into your characters from personal experience.
I love that question. So when I set out to write The Jump, I knew I couldn't write a story about largely environmentalism in a big city like Seattle without having an extremely colorful and diverse cast. So I knew I was going to be writing characters with very different experiences from my own. And Han is one of them because he has autism and he's also white and male. Lots of experiences I don't have right there. I consulted a friend of mine as a sensitivity reader, and I paid her and everything. She read through Han's chapters just to make sure I was, getting as close to right as I could, writing a character who has autism and all of those experiences. And I knew I wanted to mention his parents specifically and how they approached his neurodiversity. His father is very accepting and constantly learning throughout the story what his son needs from him. And his mother, on the other hand, is briefly mentioned, but she's not there yet. So I wanted to write an authentic story about these characters with different struggles without being prescriptive, if you know what I mean, and explaining to the reader how to behave around someone with those experiences because they aren't mine. So for instance, Jax has a moment where he gets on to a public bus and another character accuses him of stealing, and the bus driver's whole persona changes and he starts accusing him right along with the other character and everything. And that's an experience that I've had as a Black person. So I felt okay letting the reader know this is how this situation might actually play out. Whereas with Han, I only briefly mentioned his mother just because I didn't want to explain to the reader this is how this scenario would play out because I haven't lived it. I hope that answered your question. It was a great question, thanks.
My name is Phoebe, and my first question is, I know authors have their own way of making a story, so I was wondering, what is your mindset when you make a story?
Ooh, I love that question. This sounds like a writing process question. Yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. So usually what I do when I start writing a story is I start out with a question. So in the case of my first book, Slay, it was, what would happen if somebody made a Wakanda-inspired virtual reality world? And then that led to the question, who would have a problem with that? And it turns out that has a 50,000-word answer. So there's a book. And then with The Jump, I actually came up with a question after reading about the cicada 1301, I always forget the numbers, the cicada puzzle, which was a real-life cryptology puzzle that happened in 2012 and 2014. It was an actual mysterious group that popped up with this first clue, and that led to the next clue, the next clue, the next clue, and it's still not known to this day what the winners won or where they went. They basically disappeared. So there's a whole lot of conspiracy theories around it. It's just the whole idea is very creepy. And so I started thinking, what would happen if I wrote about 4 teens who did a similar puzzle? I would read that book. I kind of want to write that book. So from there, after I have my question ready, I make a bulleted list of all of my scenes or chapters and include in each bullet what has to happen in that chapter or scene for it to be important in the book. Otherwise, my editor is going to kick it out immediately. And then at the end of each bullet, the hook that keeps the reader turning the page to the next chapter. And so once I have that short bulleted list, it's off to the races. And then the name of the game is speed through that first draft because otherwise I'll overthink it. I'll end up with 63 characters and 200,000 words of nonsense. So that's usually how the process goes for me. Thanks for your question.
Hi, I'm Remy, and in the back of the book with the author's note, it says you have a BA, I think it's Bachelor's Associate or Bachelor's Degree?
Yeah, Bachelor of Arts.
in economics. And in the book, economics plays like a really huge role with like, I would like to think the characters and like their motivations. And then once Royal comes in, there's like a couple of pages where they go back and forth, and there's a specific quote from Royal where he's like, I can't believe people are actually desperate enough to do this, and because they're having fun while doing it. And I was wondering, how exactly did your bachelor's degree play a role in this?
I love that question. So, taking a lot of different economics and finance and business courses throughout my time getting my degree, I learned a lot of information that I feel like should be available to the general public, and people who don't know that information are at a great disadvantage. So there's a scene in the book where I talk about APR versus APY, which is a way of displaying interest. APR is the one that people love to advertise. So you'll see on a car commercial, 0% APR. It's like you pay the car note within the first 3 months, you don't pay any interest. What they don't mention is APY, which accrues over time. So if you don't pay it off in the first 3 months, all of that interest has accrued and keeps accruing on itself. So you pay an astronomical amount. And if they don't tell you the APY up front, or if you don't know to ask for it, you might be signing up for terms under nefarious pretenses. So just learning how unprepared I was for the world after getting that degree, had I not, learned that kind of stuff, I really, really wanted to talk in this book about just the difference between the two teams in terms of privilege. Because Team Royal's parents, there's a good chance they know to tell their kids about those kinds of things because of just where they are with their wealth. And Team Jericho's parents, they might have other preoccupations. They're running businesses, they're creating gardens, they're surviving, they have lower incomes, they might not be as highly educated, they might not be as privy to that kind of information. And that knowledge gap is what perpetuates the wealth gap. So I thought it was very, very important to talk about. And I'm really, really glad you asked that question. Thank you.
My name is Patience, and I wanted to ask about Spider-Man. Like most parents don't accept their child that easily in books or outside of books. And I just want to know if your child and the people around you were trans LGBTQ, would you accept them or would you take some time to try to understand?
I'm really glad you asked that. So my upbringing was extremely conservative, extremely Christian, extremely homophobic, big old yikes with what I was taught. And it took me a lot of learning and a lot of growing and a lot of listening. I have friends who came out as trans. Actually, it's really funny. My middle school and high school friends group, we all just kind of gravitated toward each other. And then later on, we all started coming out. Some of my friends were like, I'm actually bi. Everybody's like, hey, that's cool. And someone's like, I actually think I gravitate more toward the feminine. I might start identifying as she, her. We're like, hey, that's cool. I came out and I was like, so I'm Demi and Ace. And they're like, hey, it turns out we were all LGBTQ. We were all queer. We had no idea. That was, just one of the many things that drew us to each other. And then, actually, one of my friends the other day was talking about how she's pregnant for the first time. And she was talking about transgenderism and the policing of books that talk about transgender teens and future transgender teens, and just making that transition into parenthood. Both of us were talking about this. It blows my mind how somebody could just walk away from their child or have an issue with their gender being different from what they assumed it was when they were born. The question from day one is the baby healthy? And I don't know why that would change 30 years down the road when you find out the gender is different. Is baby healthy? Then we're all wrong. That's where I am on the subject.
Hi, my name is Angelique, and I'm interested in traveling and also interested to know how you chose to see of all places and all the locations in the book.
I love that question. So I lived in Seattle for 7 years, and I live in Philadelphia now. And it was quite a cultural shift. In Seattle, I would bike everywhere. Lived the hippie lifestyle, Birkenstocks, granola, the whole 9 yards. Philadelphia is like a little more buttoned up, a little more corporate. Leisure wear out there is Lululemon. Like it's just a very different vibe. And so for like several months to a year when I first moved out there, it was very like, oh my goodness, I miss Seattle, I miss how free I felt, I miss the mountains, all these different things. So I felt myself pining to my old home. And then as I thought about where I wanted to put these 4 kids exploring a scavenger hunt and going up against a corporation, it made so much sense for it to happen in Seattle and specifically South Lake Union. For those who don't know Seattle very well, South Lake Union is Amazon's backyard. That's like where their headquarters is. So I was like, if I'm going to talk about an entirely fictional, by the way, for legal reasons, corporation, might as well have it in an area where people already know what it's like to live in a corporation's backyard. And then all of the locations in the book are actually real. So if you're in Seattle reading The Jump, you can walk around and explore the city and actually go to these places. Or you can just open up Google Maps Street View and see what there is to see. Thanks for that question.
Hello, my name is Sheeta, and I really like how your characters act. And most books I've read, they didn't really feel authentic and didn't really like have their age. And how do you make your teen characters feel authentic?
Oh, I love that question. How do I make my teen characters feel authentic, but I'm a 31-year-old woman? I mean, that's a constant struggle for so many YA authors, right? And especially in the age of censorship, because all it's really done is just accelerate how quickly our language is evolving. Like, I don't know if you watch a lot of YouTube, you may have noticed there's a lot of language changes that have had to happen just because of the algorithm. If you say certain words that are on topics, that are related to topics that YouTube doesn't want to advertise about, you have to change the words that you're using. So for example, the word suicide, or death, or murder. Instead, people are using the word unalive, and it's just become part of conversation now, because the algorithm doesn't pick up on that word. So slang is evolving way quicker than it was 5 to 10 years ago. And mainly what I've been doing is receiving new trends and ideas with an open mind, instead of, saying, oh, who knows what the kids are doing. I feel like the kids are doing some stuff over here, who knows. I've also been reading a lot of other YA books, and especially by authors who are in their lower 20s, who are just teenagers, because they're the experts. So both of those things have helped immensely. What was your question?
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and my first question is, how does it feel to work on some of Insomniac's game narrative, like Spider-Man 2?
That's a great question. Insomniac's a great place. And I love writing for video games. Writing Subnautica Below Zero was actually one of the most informative experiences I've ever had with regard to writing and craft. There was so much pivoting that had to be done. So one day they would have us writing dialogue between characters who knew each other super well, and then other days they would have us writing corporate memos from a character's boss, who was like, this boss was like very toxic, and like, he was like, oh, if you're not feeling too well, or if you start coughing up blood or something, just look in the medicine cabinet and see if you have any vacation accrued. Okay, later, bye. Like, so having to switch over that quickly to different things, and then writing, item descriptions, so like informing the character of what they're looking at, what ingredients they need for certain recipes. Just, there's so much quick changing around the clock, and it taught me so much. So yeah, I love game development, I love writing games, and Insomniac's a great place.
Yeah, that's Insomniac's like one of my favorites. Subnautica is such a big game.
Thank you.
I personally am really good at picking up at the smallest of details in anything. And on page 2, Jax's mom says, amethyst today for protection. Why do you think I need protection today? Just a feeling. And I wanted to say there are so many details within the story, but on page 2, Jax's mom gives him that amethyst. And I wanted to know before we meet any of the characters, before the plot, before anything, you wanted to give a sense of danger. And I wanted to know why you put that there.
Love that question. That's exactly why I put that in there. As a writer, I love messing with my readers. So I love getting into people's heads and being like, okay, you should be freaked out right now. And I knew that a crystal made a lot of sense, and it was also something that I could have Jax, periodically reach up and like toy with to like remind the reader like that amethyst is still necessary. And then it comes up again toward the end with the jail scene, and we see the amethyst sitting there, and it's like, okay, yep, that's what this was for. I love foreshadowing, and it can come up in so many different ways, even the smallest of things. So I'm really happy you picked up on that.
I'm really happy you put that detail in there because it's like slightly hinted throughout the story.
Thank you.
My second question is, I know you have different food choices in your story. I was wondering, how did you come up with the food choices? Did you have any trouble picking the food? And did you connect any of the food to the characters?
I love that question. So food often takes on the role of its own character in my stories. Camilla food. But in this one in particular, it plays a big, big role, especially for Spider. His family runs a restaurant that has so many different Asian dishes that they sell. And it's funny because a lot of their patrons walk in and a lot of them might not even be able to tell where some of these dishes are from. They just know, oh, ramen, I recognize what that is. Oh, ramyeon or tteokbokki or banh mi. Like I know that is an Asian dish and I've had it before because I did a summer abroad somewhere or something and now I'm an expert. And so I really wanted to drive home that like the lines can get blurred when you're talking about people experiencing other people's cultures and that those lines really, really matter. So when I got the notes back for the sensitivity reader for Spider, one of the notes that I got was the history of Korean people and Japanese people and why I needed to focus on, not necessarily focus on, I guess, but take into consideration that the Japanese have oppressed Korean people for hundreds of years. And so when I'm talking about a Korean family selling Japanese food, I need to know the nuance behind that. So Spider has a lot of feelings about just the patrons that come into the restaurant and everything. There was also a note that I got back from Yaz's sensitivity reader where she was all excited for ramen and she's talking about chashu broth, which is a pork broth, and Yaz wears a hijab, so no. So we had to make her dish vegetarian. Notes like that were very, very important. So yeah, food played a big role in this book. Oh, and Jax is vegan. Forgot about that. Because I can't really talk about a book about environmentalism without addressing veganism, because it's a big environmental topic.
So I forgot where I read it, but I think it was like an old interview or something. But you said one of your favorite games was Undertale.
Yes.
And I was wondering with because Undertale has like the different routes you can take. There's pacifist, there's the neutral route, I think, and then there's genocide. And I was wondering if like you put, or like there was any sort of influence from Undertale, or if it's just like a more like a worldwide thing, because Han does mention, I think it's in like a car, he is a pacifist, so he doesn't want to go around with like the people in jail and the corporations. So I was wondering, you said, do you like Undertale, or like just, oh, it's an enjoyable game, or it's like I'm gonna incorporate or see if I can incorporate like any of these small details into the story?
I love that question. I love any excuse to talk about Undertale. to this day, I think it's one of the most incredible games ever created. And I tend to like any game that has you start off thinking that you're playing a certain game, and then by the end you realize you're playing in a completely different genre. So Undertale, Doki Doki Literature Club, Pentiment, all of those types of games, it's like, I love it, love it. But the thing I love so much about Undertale is that there's so much influence that you have on the characters around you. Like, they really took a lot of time and energy to make the pacifist, the neutral, and the genocide run have vastly different consequences. Like, I played the first round and got neutral because I was like, I think I killed someone on accident, like the first. Because 8-bit games are not my skill set, like I'm not great at them, so I accidentally killed someone, and then I took the pacifist run from there. But I looked up someone taking the genocide run, and as soon as you start like killing 3 or 4 characters, all of the other NPCs just vanish. They're just gone. It's like a ghost town in the game. And like if you do see someone, they're like hiding from you, or they're like terrified to meet you. Like you instantly become the villain. They did an excellent job with that. And I think Han is definitely a pacifist. And I definitely wanted him to come up against Red Cap guy because he's a genocide run kind of guy. And in the moment where Han he comes out of the elevator and Red Cap guy is like, I'm gonna kill you. The chapter ends and I was like, I actually didn't know what I was gonna do with that because I was like, how in the world is Han gonna beat this guy? This guy is wild. But I got him out of there, okay. Yeah, definitely wanted to bring those two against each other because I love conflict. Thanks.
The book Slave was about like this girl Kira trying to find her like identity as a black person in this white school, and the Jax and his whole group just kept getting stared from people like, what are these kids doing now? Like even Team Royal didn't get any like school, they were rich, they were like fancy stuff. And I just wanted to know, did you ever experience the same thing as Team Royal did?
I love that question. Thank you. I haven't personally experienced like playing a game out in public and like being, targeted or questioned for what I was doing, but my little brother did. So when we were very young, there was a toy that came out called Scanners Commanders. Has anyone heard of that? I'm old. Okay, cool, great. This game called Scanners Commanders, and they gave you a scanner, and you would scan different barcodes to get different monsters. So they're like digital monsters that you get. And so of course, like every cereal box in the house had like the barcode cut out of it, like random stuff would have the barcode cut out of it. My parents would get so upset and be like, you're like ruining everything in the house, what are you doing? And then when we would go into grocery stores, of course he'd be picking up random products and scanning them. And to the clerks, it looked like he was trying to like disable some kind of sensor on the product or do something weird. They just assumed that he was 9. What do you think he's trying to like ask me? But he got questioned about it a couple times. Like my parents did too. They were like, "What is your child doing?" And I explained it's a toy. It's not doing anything. But yeah, it's very different for a child of color playing a game like this in public, even though it's totally innocent. Even something as looking under a trash can outside of the 5 Point Cafe in the book. Jax was very aware of where he was and what it looked like he was doing. So, just wanted to juxtapose the experience between different kids. Good question, thanks.
What inspired you when it comes to cooking? And why did you choose him as a villain?
I love that question. Whether I choose Malcolm as a villain. So, funny story. I was inspired to write Slay after seeing Black Panther. And I came home after seeing the movie and I was like, I want to go back to Wakanda. I had never had an experience like that in the theater. Because growing up, I was one of the only Black kids in my class and most of my city. And so I quickly became like the resident Black culture expert among my classmates. People expected me to know certain things about Black culture. They expected me to eat certain foods. They were surprised when I would speak the way I speak. A couple of my classmates even asked me to teach them how to speak ghetto. So that was fun. And so I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me. I was like, am I not Black enough? Like, I'm not meeting the kids' expectations of what a Black girl is supposed to be. Like, should I be eating different things and like know how, like, be able to explain the scientific breakdown of my hair and whatever. So I grew up thinking I wasn't Black enough. And I also felt out of place in predominantly Black spaces because I grew up in Oregon. It's not like I was, living among Black culture. And so going to see Black Panther was the very first time I walked into a room full of Black people, and it was enough to just cross my arms and say, "We'll come forever," and I'm in. Like, that was it. It was that easy. And so when I left the theater, I was like, I've got to go back. That was amazing. I can't just go back to work after seeing that movie. So I sat down to grade sleigh, and I knew that the next hit mag was coming up, which is a Twitter pitch contest where you can get a lot of attention from agents quite quickly. And it was coming up in 14 days. And the rule is that you have to have a finished manuscript to enter. So I wrote the first draft of Slay in 11 days. I got 4 friends to edit it in 2. I paid them. I offered to pay them. They refused to pay them anyway. And sent it out. So I actually didn't know that Malcolm was going to be the villain until I got to that scene where Kira was typing, "Who are you?" And I was like, okay, after all this time, it can't actually be Wyatt. Because that's like rule number 1 of a mystery. It's never who you actually suspect the whole book. So I was like, who else would it make sense to be? I was like, absolutely not Steph. That's not happening. People will be mad at me. Absolutely not Harper, because it's not in her to be that kind of person. And I started thinking about Malcolm and what his history was, and how much he loved gaming as a kid, and it was his place of refuge. All of his opinions that he had that conflicted with Kira's in seemingly innocent ways, hints of misogyny that he had displayed, hints of bigotry that had been displayed, and I was like, yeah, no, he's gonna go full villain mode here. It just makes total sense. And so from there on, I knew Malcolm was gonna be the villain. But I also made a point to explain at the end that it was not an easy choice to decide to call the police on Black man. Like, this was something Kira really had to wrestle with. And I would hope that everybody would if they're in that situation. But Steph made a very good point at the end. She said, you have to look out for you first. You are in danger. That is what you need to worry about. So that was a very long explanation, but thank you for your question.
What kind of video games have you inspired reading The Jump?
That's a good question. What video games inspired The Jump? I feel like I learned something about writing every time I play a narrative-driven video game. So it'd have to be all of them, which is probably not the answer you were hoping for. I recently played the game Pentiment. Has anyone played that? You're solving a murder mystery. So it feels a lot like The Jump. There's a twist and everything. You played it, you said? Maybe? Yeah. Yeah, just this, I don't want to give anything away, but the story in that is just amazing. And I didn't see the twist coming. So, again, it's really every game that I've played that's really made a difference. Yeah, good question. Thanks.
Do you have any goals besides your already best-selling author award?
I do. I would like to write an adult book. I'm writing another YA. I'm writing a middle grade novel. And I would like to write a TV show eventually. That sounds fun. Yes. Thanks. Anyone else?
I am a sucker for twists. I love it when you think you have something figured out and then straight on your back again. I love that feeling of figuring out something new or a giant realization with your entire head that goes cold. And I wanted to understand what gave you the inspiration for the twist at the end of Jump. with like the corporation being the whole thing they were chasing the entire time?
I love that question because I love a twist too. Honestly, it was the title. It was literally the title drop that inspired it. Like, it's been so-and-so from The Jump. And I was like, okay, so the book is gonna be called The Jump, and the twist is gonna drop that sentence. And so I was like, okay, now I gotta figure out who it would be and what their motive would be. And so it made sense for it to be the police because giant institutions love other giant institutions. So it made a lot of sense for the police to be taking in youth who are tech savvy and who might pose a problem with them trying to figure out who was protesting against the corporations.
You put a lot of different clues in your book. I was wondering, how did you come up with all of the different clues?
I love that question. I really came up with the clues in order. So I would have them get to a destination, and then I would be like, okay, now I gotta figure out what the next clue is. So that 12-digit number, that was the only one that was really planned out from the beginning because I knew I wanted to do a Pokemon Go code. And that's a 12-digit number. And I believe in the book I made it start with 0 so that it's not a real code because I was like, I don't want some random person getting a bunch of ads from people. So yeah, it was really just clue by clue. I just had Google Maps open and I was like, okay, where are we going next? I knew I wanted to go to a 30 Foods because grocery shopping as a person of color, and especially a teenager of color, is a different experience than shopping as a white patron or a wealthy looking patron. You just get different types of attention when you're shopping. So I knew there were a few different locations I wanted to be in. I also wanted to go back to Pike Place Market because if anyone's been, it's a magical place. Absolutely, you've been. Absolutely beautiful. And I just had this image of Yaz running across rooftops through Pike Place Market because I want to do that. Sounds awesome. That's kind of how I did it. Yeah.
So you said with the sensitivity notes, and you got back feedback on like Yas and how you can do like the pork broth with her. How else does editing go for you? Because a lot of writers have editors, and there's different processes. Do you have like editors that just suggest you things, or you change them, or do they tell you specifically, hey, you need to change this? And what parts do you enjoy about like the editing process?
I love that question. There's very little I enjoy about editing, if I'm completely honest. Drafting, I could draft all day. I could write 6 books in a year if I was just drafting. Going back, looking at it, and absorbing that I did not write a perfect first draft is really hard for me. So we usually start with the big edits. So, which character was it? Oh, in The Cost of Knowing, my editor came back after round 1 and said, so this character Scoop is not working with the plot. We might just want to get rid of him. And I was like, oh boy. I really feel strongly that Scoop needs to be in this story because I wanted to talk about a Black teenage boy and his relationship with work and feeling like that was his purpose for being here because it was just so important to him to contribute to capitalism. So I knew that I wanted Scoop in the story. And so I went to my editor and I was like, this is what I would like for Scoop to do in the story. This is what I would like his role to be. And so she helped me kind of make it more clear why he was necessary. And also we gave his character more agency. So he was making more decisions. He had more influence over the story than he did in the first draft. But those are the kind of big edits that you get. This character should probably go. These two should not end up romantically involved. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 aren't necessary to the book. We should probably cut those. And then after that, in further editing rounds, you get more into this paragraph isn't really clear. I'm not understanding this character's arc. It feels like they don't change through the book. Is that intentional? Can we make it clear that that's intentional? And then from there, it's, you forgot a comma. Those are fine. Usually I just sweepingly, accept all of them. The commas wherever you wish. That's usually how the process goes. Answer your question.
It
inspired the John. And I wanted to know, like, did you ever solve the puzzle or did you just read the story?
That's a great question. I did not solve the cicada puzzle. I wish I was that cool. In fact, they started closing down certain parts of the puzzle because people were sharing the answers online. So once I think 10 people made it through a specific part of the puzzle where you get to the URL, they changed the page so that if you go to that URL, it says something like, "We want the leaders, not the followers. Thanks for playing." And it's like, that's the end for you. Should have been here earlier. It's a really cool story. There's a documentary on YouTube about it.
I wanted to know if you ever thought about making a movie version of Slide and Jump, because Slide is like so true to teenagers and you can like so much stuff like that, enjoy watching it.
Oh, thanks. So there has been movie interest. Someone has purchased the rights to make a movie. That does not mean it's going to be a movie. I think there's actually a big percentage of books that get movie interest, and then a producer doesn't buy it, or they decide to divert funding. So we're kind of in limbo right now, just kind of waiting for a guess. So we'll see. Maybe. That'd be great. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I was so excited to create the characters.
That's a great question. What inspired the characters in The Jump? I think their roles first. So I knew I needed like someone who's very, very good with puzzles. So that ended up being Jax. I knew I wanted someone who had a lot of physical like, range. So having a parkourist made a lot of sense. I knew I wanted somebody who knew all of Seattle in and out and under, frankly. So that was the cartographer. That ended up being Han. And I wanted someone who was digitally savvy, so that ended up being Spider. And their names came next. So usually I go with the first name that pops into my head for my characters. I think the only one that has ever changed was, what was it? Oh, actually, this character didn't end up changing. It was a note that I got back. So Jamal in Slay, who was killed, that was very close to the name Jalen. And my editor was like, maybe we should change this. I was like, I just really feeling the name Jalen. Can we keep it? She's like, yeah, fine, whatever. Usually it's the first name that pops into my head. And then their personality just kind of centers around that. What would a character like Jax look like, act like, think like? And then I just kind of let my characters tell me what they're like. It also helps to have a lot of scenes at the very beginning where they're interacting with each other, because then you get to see how they're different from each other, which makes them completely different and unique characters. Also, since this is a 4 point of view novel, so we have 4 different characters with first person voice, I assumed that their name wouldn't be at the top of each chapter and that the reader would just have to be able to tell that the voice has switched. So in the very first sentence of each chapter, I tried to make it very clear that you're reading Jax's voice, that you're reading Yaz's voice, and Spider's and Han's. In tone, in word choice, in feelings about where they are in the game, their location, all of that. And yeah, that's kind of how the characters evolved. Thank you.
What did you keep in mind when writing Jax's Mama, Ava, and Zaza?
I love that question. So I knew I wanted to have a parent in the story with tattoos, because I don't see enough parents in young adults, especially young adult stories, with tattoos. It's just not mentioned, and I feel like there's such a stigma around, there's a stigma around so many things. When you become a parent, the internet will make you feel guilty about any way you choose to parent your children. But if you have tattoos, if you have colorful hair, if you have locks, if you eat edibles, if you do gentle parenting. I do gentle parenting with my child, and the number of critiques that I've gotten are like, well, if you don't discipline your children, they're gonna grow to be little terrors. And it's like, okay, well, thank you for your opinion. I knew I wanted alternative parents in the story. And it made a lot of sense for Jax's mom to be that way. And then I also wanted at least one of these characters to have a non-binary parent, because I also don't see enough non-binary parents in stories. I don't know if I've ever seen one. And I'm like, it's time. Ava in particular, she resonates with me. She's extremely cynical about a lot of things. And she can come across like very salty and just like matter of fact about stuff. And I love unlikable female characters anyway, like they're my favorite. So I have to have one of those in there. And that made a lot of sense. Thanks for your question.
On page 15 in Mike Jackson's first paragraph, he ends up saying, "Then I noticed that a sticker clean to the top of the corner of the window with a picture of an eye, not just any eye. I know that eye from anywhere. It's the same symbol on my desktop. It's the symbol of the order." I wanted to understand what inspired the symbol of the order, and I want to know why it resonates with Jack so much.
I love that question. So I decided to make the symbol of the order an eye because I wanted it to be a reminder or a hint that they're always watching. In a lot of communities, the police like to believe that they have eyes everywhere and that they see all, and they want to make you feel like they're always watching because they believe it deters crime from happening. There is also a privilege discrepancy in having private spaces. So in a lot of Black communities, we see a lot of people hanging out on stoops because there are not as many indoor spaces to be and to do recreational activities. And so outdoor existing, aka loitering, is often heavily policed, disproportionately in poorer communities. So putting eyes everywhere throughout this book and then having it end up being the police made a lot of sense to me. It's also supposed to be a very unnerving symbol. And then it's also kind of a loose reference to an older game called Papers, Please. There's, you play it? Oh, it's so good. There's a group there in that game called the Ezek Order, and they have kind of what looks like an eye, and I was like, let's do a full-blown eye. So, yeah, good question, thanks.
Out of all the characters that you put in Jump, I was wondering which character was your favorite out of all of them?
Oh goodness, which character is my favorite? Oh, that's so hard. I mean, I enjoyed writing all of them. Okay, I'll answer this a little differently. If I had to pick one character to have lunch with, it would probably be Amma. She just seems like she would be so full of like knowledge and stories and like wild adventures in her past. I'd love to have a conversation with her.
So with character development, they're all really, in the beginning, they're all a really close team, and you can tell that they're really close. But once Royal comes in and the stuff starts happening, they all sort of start disintegrating. Like the friendships, they all sort of doubt each other. They all sort of doubt each other. And you can tell it plays a role because there's people splitting off and doing different things, and that leads to like the end conflict. Did you decide to do that? Like, how did you decide to go about like, hey, we're really good friends, but once we get more stressed out, we start going clashing against each other, even though we fit so well, and we sort of come back to in the end to help each other. How did that work out for you?
That's a great question. So you've heard the phrase, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Yeah, as soon as you start throwing power and influence into the mix, it can distort a lot of relationships. You hear about, young couples getting married and then one or both of them finding fame, and then the marriage just disintegrates and they grow distant. Or you bring immense stress into a relationship and then you find out you turn into entirely different people under stressful situations. I knew that this puzzle in particular was going to test their friendship. And it actually happens for both teams. Team Royal doesn't really survive the end of it. But yeah, when the going gets tough, that's how you find out who your real friends are. that's when it matters.
If you were to like create your own character and put it in a book, how would you create a character? Would you give yourself a different personality?
Oh, you mean as me? What would I even contribute to Jericho? I don't know any of that. I'm not a cartographer, I'm not a cryptologist, I'm certainly not a parkourist. I'd probably be closest to puzzler. I know Seattle really well. Yeah. I probably just help with the puzzling part.
Does it have to be Team Gerald? So you could be like really calm and really
True. I might also be good at I don't know, maneuvering my way into spaces. Like if there was a clue that ended up in I don't know, in a corporate building in one of the offices, and I'd be able to walk in and fake that I work there or something. I don't know, I think it'd be kind of fun. Just stealth out. Thanks.
I wanted to ask this, when I was asking about the movie version. I wanted to know if you make a cartoons, kind of how come, I don't like the end of the story, I kind of I feel thinking about it. I was like, you make a part two. I just want to know what happens after this and learn from his mistakes, this and change. And it's stuck up here.
That's a great question. I've thought about writing a sequel. I haven't talked to my editor about it, but I could totally see Malcolm doing his time and doing some self-exploration. Be babe, you've changed. But it's here's gotta figure out what to do with that. So that'd be a lot of fun to write. Maybe one day.
How is representation important to you in today's society?
How is representation important in today's society? I think it's important because as a writer, I feel a responsibility to write the world as it is because I write contemporary, so I write about our world right now. If I was writing historical, it would be important to write about the world as it was, and if I was writing futuristic, it would be important to write about the world as I imagine it could be. But since I write contemporary, I feel a responsibility to my readers to write about the world as it is, and I can't write about the world as it is if I'm writing from an echo chamber. So if I'm writing all cishet characters, what kind of world is that? It's not ours. And I think the more we expose kids to a variety of voices with a variety of backgrounds, the more equipped they're going to be to function in this world, which is why I'm super heated about these censorship things that are happening in the news. I just think we're doing a disservice to our kids blocking any of that. Excellent question, thank you.
How did you come up with the teams, their names, the Jericho, the Royals, what did you keep in mind when writing?
Good question. I think, funny story, I think somewhere in the recesses of my mind, Kareem wears that purple velvet suit, and their name is Team Royal, and I don't know if the imagery of Crown Royal was buried deep in my head somewhere, but those two go together, and maybe I just connected them in my mind. That was honestly just the first name that popped into my head, Team Royal. And also, since they're the team with an extreme variety of extremely privileged backgrounds, Royal just seemed to be this lofty kind of who you think you are kind of name. Maybe calling themselves the elites or something. It's oh god, okay, it's them. I wanted them to seem pompous from the first time you hear their name. And then with Jericho, the classic biblical story of Jericho with the walls falling eventually. It was supposed to be the city that couldn't be conquered. And from the very beginning, they have a rock solid friendship. And throughout the whole book, I wanted that imagery in the back of the reader's mind, is the wall going to fall? Is this puzzle going to break these four characters apart? Great question, thanks.
I have to know, was the order ever real? Because in the end of the book, Jack ends up talking about he's not going to chase it anymore, but it doesn't make it clear. Was the order always the police and they were just playing the long game? Were they actually a group of people that took a step back when the police came in? Was the order ever what they thought it was?
You're not gonna like this answer. Damn it. Okay, so, if you have looked under the jacket of any of my books, you'll know that there are usually secrets. And with the Jumps cover, there is a secret under the jacket. Look for it. If you follow that secret, you'll be rewarded with a prize that will answer your question.
I was wondering, what kind of video games do you play right now?
Ooh, I love that question. So I just finished Pentiment. I just finished God of War.
Ragnarok?
Yes. Did you play it? No.
I'm replaying them all.
You're playing them all, okay. Oh, it's so good. And I can't say anything about it without spoiling it. It is a beautiful game.
I know.
Beautiful.
Oh, you said you're replaying it?
Yeah, because I have a PS4. I have PlayStation, so I get all of them if I have Plus. So I have all of them. So I went back and I'm playing the first one right now.
Oh, nice.
The one with baby Atreus. And then he grows up.
I know. That was bittersweet. He popped up as a teenager in the new one, and I was like, oh, so big now. And it's really cool to see them, like, if you've seen, like, the difference between them mocapping. Like, in the first one, Atreus is, like, the actor is so tiny. Because he's a little kid. And then Christopher Judge is, like, 7 foot, whatever he is.
Giant.
Yeah, it's huge. And then in the next one, there's Atreus is so tall now. Anyway, yeah, it's a very big book.
Because the actor grew up with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which was a smart decision.
Would you write a book like that?
Like God of War?
Yeah, like just like with Greek lore.
Ooh. Maybe. Maybe. So straight up fantasy has not been my wheelhouse. And honestly, the planning stage of fantasy really intimidates me. Like with contemporary, I can get away with, a simple bulleted list, and then it's like we're off to the races drafting. A friend of mine, Roseanne Brown, who wrote A Song of Wraith and Ruin, had an 82-page planning sheet. And I was like, that sounds like work. So maybe one day, we'll see.
So Spider, and his family, they're Korean, right? Yeah. So they're Korean and they have their own little shop. Page 132 or 133, it mentions that one of their family members are in the hospital and they don't have identification. So there's an wordless hospital. And I get mentioned sort of near the end where like he says to lay low and Spider has that to the side and he goes out. How did you decide, or like did you have any help dealing with like the immigration issue or like the fact that they could get caught with the police just because this one person had an accident and is in the hospital now?
Absolutely. So I have people on my editing team who are first and second generation immigrants, and they had a lot of stories to tell me about identification and papers and just that constant anxiety knowing that you're on thin ice at any given time, and that if you get sent to the hospital or put in jail, or if you touch the bureaucracy at all, there's a chance you could be outed and worst case scenario deported. I really, really wanted to drive that home with Taejin and Taeyong, his sister. I knew I wanted to feature a family that is caught up in the immigration process because I was talking about big topics like gentrification and like this feeling that the corporations' claws were like closing in and Round World had its hands in everything. And just that feeling of being suffocated, just living your day-to-day life. So that's why it was really important for me to put that in there. Yeah. Thanks.
On the last page, you put Taejin wrote this letter to Spider and I got my degree. I'm getting my degree in 2 months and I haven't been a paid employer. And they're the review. I want to know if that was a hint, like that's the order or something, or was it just a hint?
I I highly suggest you check out some URL.
I wanted to talk about the name of Jericho. Because I played this game called Detroit Becomes Human.
Yeah.
And then every time I hear Jericho, that's what it reminds me about how they made that Jericho place and then the robots would hide and all that. I like that game. It's so futuristic. That's what I wanted to say, because it just reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Have you played it?
I have. It's such a good game.
It is.
And it's honestly a feat of narrative genius. Like, I don't know if many people know this, but there are 40 different endings to that game. Like, they have a picture at the end of like the dialogue tree that you can go through, and it is massive. That game was a huge work of art. And I completely forgot about the Jericho reference.
Yeah.
So maybe that was a subconscious thing. Thanks.
So going back to God of War, how did you feel when Atreus was hinted to be like Loki? That's with the bear and stuff.
You mean at the end of the 2018 game?
Yeah.
Mind blown. Totally didn't see that coming. I was like, okay, so this is an entirely different character that we all kind of know already from mythology. Like, what does that mean for his character? What does that mean for his arc? What characters does he interact with? Who are his children? Like, where is this going? What's going to happen in the next game? And they no spoilers, but they did such a great job of having him explore what his identity as Loki ends up becoming.
As I said before, noticing foreshadowing a lot. People have already talked about the meaning of Jericho. She just said a biblical reference. But one thing I did notice is the second they started talking about it, they referenced walls a lot from like a biblical reference. And I wanted to tell you or ask you, because I picked up on the idea that they said, quote, stronger together. And then I knew just then that they were going to fall apart. There was going to be something that separated them. They had to try to find their way back together. And I wanted to know, was that a subconscious thing, or did you plan for that to happen?
Plan for it to happen. Yep. It didn't come until later though that I started like going back and seeding in like hints. And my editor actually had something to do with this. She was like, we need to make a very clear transition between all of them being together and united and why they're a team and like their history together, so that when they start falling apart and the cracks start forming, the reader can go, oh my goodness, no, stop it. It hopefully worked. So.
How long did it take for you to write it down?
Ooh, I think a month and a half for the first draft, and then like 6 to 8 months of editing. That's the thing, the faster you write that first draft, the more editing you gotta do. Generally.
How much changed from the arc that the students got to the final published product?
Not a whole lot. There were a couple instances where the term mom and Amma were used interchangeably, because at first I had Spider's character, his mom asking him to call her mom, and then everyone else called her Amma. And it was supposed to be a reference to like, she wants to raise her child as an American child, and she's very much like, I want you to assimilate into American culture, and so call me mom. So as not to like draw attention and everything and blend in. And then the notes that I got back from our sensitivity reader was that actually it would make more sense for it to go the opposite, and that they'd never seen it reversed like that, and it was weird and it was jarring and it just wasn't coming across. And so we flipped it where everyone else called her mom, and she says, Desham, call me Amma. And so that just ended up being more authentic. So there might be a couple instances where like you're like, wait, who's calling you what? In the arc. So that's one example. Thanks.
You've mentioned the sensitivity notes. What exactly are those? I don't know if I haven't heard of those before, and I don't know if you've mentioned it, but what are those and how do you get them?
Great question. So notes, so let me back up. A sensitivity reader is someone who reads for a particular character who has an experience or set of experiences that are different from what the author has grown up with. So we had a sensitivity reader who was a transgender Korean male. We had a sensitivity reader who has autism. We had a sensitivity reader who is Black Pakistani and visibly Muslim. So she wears a niqab, actually, I think. Whereas Yaz wears a hijab. And then I handled Jax's character because he's half black and half white, and my son has that experience. So I felt close enough to his experience to write that one. But sensitivity readers I found are extremely, extremely important. And unfortunately, with a lot of publishing, publishers will hold back funds because you're supposed to pay sensitivity readers. Like, it really shouldn't be free labor. And a lot of publishers will say, the money's not there, like, we can't afford this, it's too late in the publishing process. And so I asked up front, like, do we have some space for at least 3 sensitivity readers? And when I got the yes, that was when I started writing their characters. Because I knew I was gonna get some things wrong. Like, I was just gonna get some things wrong. And so I'm very, very grateful for the notes that I got back. And I think the most important thing that a lot of authors miss when getting sensitivity readers is to take the notes and then not negotiate them. Because a lot of authors will say, well, like, I know I got this note back about someone's culture, someone's experiences, but it really doesn't serve the story, and I was planning on going this direction, or what I meant to say was this, and I was trying to communicate this other thing. And it's like, if what you're trying to communicate is not communicating, it's time to listen to the experts. So, that's sensitivity.
I think with that you did a really good job with Han, because I read Han's entrance to me was really entertaining, and then from like the beginning I'm just like, is he selective mute or like some sort of mute, because I've gone through the experience of being sort of autistic and I was selective mute for like a long time. So I was reading him and I was like, I really relate to this character, so he's absolutely one of my favorite characters in the book.
Well, thank you, that means a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, you have some diligent readers in this one.
I see.
Look at how many notes
Those are
and
amazing
sticky notes they have in their books. All along the way, they would come running into the library, telling me things that were happening in the book.
I resonated a lot with a mixture of Han and Jax. I'm a very outgoing person. I'm always there. I'm always up front. The second I enter the room, everyone knows I'm there. A lot like Jax, I'm definitely an outspoken person. But at the same time, I definitely resonated with the way, like, internally Han worked, the way of noticing everything around me, how I can like almost feel the voices and being able to feel everything around me, and I can communicate with everything with my voice. And I really liked how I could resonate with both characters and understand them from a different point of view, even though they were 2 completely different. And I really loved that. You did an amazing job.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
The school scene where the fire alarm went off and like the loud noises, that was really nicely done, because I've gone through like, they could tell you like if something happens, I will jump, and I was raised in like a household where my past stepfather was like verbally abusive, so now I have like bad reactions to loud noises, and I was selective mute because I was too scared to talk back then. So I think with Spider noticing, I also like Spider a lot because I also relate to, but Spider noticing Han and the loud noises in the school, I like that part because I related a lot to it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm so sorry that was your experience. Some solidarity. My own father was verbally abusive and extremely controlling. And so to this day, when people yell, I get oh my goodness, what's happening? So.
I'm in the exact same boat with that, except it was my mother. So I definitely got attached because the mother figures in the characters are just so good. I got attached to them really quickly because I love how they were quickly accepting, they had like inside jokes, they had the stuff I didn't really get to grow up with. And I loved how I was not only experiencing the character's storylines, but I was experiencing my own. As if I was inside that book, picking up everything else everyone else was.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think when I was writing all of the mother characters, I think when I was growing up, my mom almost didn't have time for ease because she was so busy dealing with like the chaos that was my father. And like as a mom myself, like that's what I want. I want to give my child a life of ease and a life of peace. So like I'm the mom that leaves like 30 minutes early for everything because I don't want to be the mom that's like screaming at my child to get out the door, that kind of thing. Like I wrote all the moms that I would like to be in the book. Thanks.
In the book, Chance's mom says you can't protest, you just have to vote when you're 18 and be the change. I just want to know what your life motto is.
That's a good question. What is my life motto? The first one I thought of was actually a quote from RuPaul, which is, "You're born naked and the rest is drag." That's I think when it comes to like protesting specifically and like fighting against institutions that are not serving you, like to the world, I'm like, yes, like, you know, rise up and don't take it from anyone, and like, you know, give the establishment the middle finger and fight what you disagree with and everything. But I really, really empathize with Jax's mom because I feel like she believes the same thing. And then when her own son is like, "Can I protest?" she's like, "You know what? Maybe it would be better if you just didn't." And it's just so much harder when it's your own child or when it's someone you love and care deeply about. Seeing them on the front lines is a different story. So I think having my own child and writing a book like this really, really challenged me. And I was like, am I prepared for my child to like actually listen to me and do what I'm saying? Which, no, but hopefully one day.
Again, I love Jack so much. I immediately clicked with his character. And one of my absolute favorite paragraphs is on page 9. And when I found this paragraph, I could not stop telling people about it because I found it so funny. And it was the paragraph when he sits down on the stool too hard and he like goes into like, "I'm gonna hunt this out the window." And I feel that so much. I've gone to like, I can be in the classroom and my freaking bell will catch on the door and my friend Phoebe right here, she has seen me like kick the door open just out of anger because of that. I love that so much, and he portrayed the characters so much. Just love that part.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really funny. It was important to me when talking about like just the mechanics of solving the clues, how their lack of privilege was holding them back in a physical way. So like Spider almost careens backwards because he's sitting on milk crates at his desk, and the desk is wobbly, and like it's definitely not a standing desk. It's not ergonomically correct. It's not comfortable. Whereas Team Royal, you could totally see them having like an ergonomically evaluated standing desk in their room, like with lightning fast internet. Like at the very beginning, Jax is like, "Oh my goodness, so like the who's on the bandwidth? Like I can't figure this out. Like I don't have the tools to succeed." Was the message that I was going for. With so much of their just physical equipment, the time that they have to take to traverse the city without being able to call up an Uber and just hop in and go straight to where the clue is. Or, in the case of Kareem, have his mom just pick them up in a Range Rover in 10 minutes. Just the amount of extra work that Jericho had to do just because of what they had access to was a really, really important narrative for me to get at. And I think it applies in school too. Applies in school. I think students can only be expected to operate as efficiently as the tools they've been given and the funding that their schools have been given. So there's a much bigger narrative to that. I'm really, really glad you picked up on it. Thank you.
Who did you relate to in Team World and Team Turkey? Like, did you have Wi-Fi or were you fast internet?
So I grew up pretty firmly middle class, so it was kind of right between the two. I was largely kind of like where Kira's family is economically. Both my parents were together. We were 1 or 1.5 incomes for most of our childhood. So we were comfortable. We never had to, want for food or anything. Excuse me. We didn't have like the latest technology. I didn't have an ergonomically evaluated standing desk. But we were fine. I think if I was playing with Team Jericho when I was a teenager, my biggest hurdle would have been my super controlling dad being like, okay, where are you going to be at 8:32? Instead of like technology barriers. So.
My parents are controllers, so I
Yeah.
can't go anywhere.
Oh boy. What year are you? Senior? Junior? Junior? I don't know about that. And then your relationship with your parents completely changes as an adult. Really? You don't think so?
My sister, when she got out of the house, our parents were like, she's gonna come back. She's not gonna survive.
Yeah.
And she's gonna walk around.
Oh, that's kind of bleak. I mean, if it helps, I encourage you as an adult to define what your relationship with other people are like. Whoever it is, right? Like, determining your own boundaries and what's important to you is super, super important. So.
How did you decide, or did you have any hand in designing the cover art? Because I love looking at it, and I find the characters' uniqueness very beautiful.
Oh, good question. It was funny, they asked if I had any cover hopes or wishes this time around, and I was like, well, I already have a pink book, and I already have a blue book. I'd really love to have a purple book. And they were like, how about gray with a purple jacket? And I was like, as long as it's Jack's. So that's my purple on the cover. I also knew I wanted a striking title across the cover, especially since it's 4 letters, and I'm super, super glad that they made it disjointed. I also knew I wanted all 4 characters on the cover somewhere, and so they put all 4 members of Team Jericho on the front, and I really wanted Royal on the back, running up the scaffolding, but we were on a time crunch, and they were like, we had time for 4 characters, so those were the 4 they went with. I'm really happy with it.
I love how Jump is on the front of the cover and in the very last page. And I love how that's the only time that those words are said in the book, and it's back and forth. It starts the book and it closes the book. And I just like that.
Thank you. So, funny story. There's a couple different places where the phrase "the jump" is seated in, and I actually thought readers were going to get very annoyed with me that I was doing so many title drops. In Yaz's first chapter, when she's parkouring across the rooftops, she says, "I'm going to make the jump."
Yeah, I noticed that throughout the little thing. It was very subtle and very thin. I could see the climax of it. And I loved how when they were getting from the helicopter and he was like, I need to just be like, yes, just let go and make the jump.
Mm-hmm.
And he catches him with the hand, and I could just picture the entire thing, the fire, the noises and everything. And even though it was throughout the entire story, it was that last sentence with the jump was a giant close off. Even though it was at the end of the book, it settled right. It was perfect.
Thank you. That means a lot.
So here, you have a teacher that reads, and she doesn't see the action, she just sees words, and you're like, how can you not see the action?
I can see,
Just the words. If you're reading the book,
I see the action, just the words.
what's happening.
I visualize what's happening. Oh man. It depends on the book. If it's a book that's visually stunning, so for example, I read the book The Astonishing Color of, that's not what it's called. The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. And it's about a girl who is half Malaysian and half white, and she goes to Malaysia to find out what happened to her mother who passed away. And throughout the whole book, there is imagery and color descriptions like I've never read before. And same in her second book, Eric to the Moon, just the imagery in that book was so vivid. It was impossible to read it without visualizing things as they happen. Whereas if I read a book that doesn't do so great of a job with visualizations, I won't name any names for this one. I find it a lot harder to like immerse myself and feel like I'm in the book. And usually when that happens, I'll give it 50 or 60 pages and I'm like, maybe I'll read something else.
Do you want to get your books?
Yes.
Yes.
please.